Hey Eric, how's it going?
Oh, hella busy. Too many meetings, not enough time.
I feel you. Hey Brandon.
Hello, hello.
If this goes long today, I'll have to drop it about a quarter till.
Okay. Yeah, today's agenda is gonna be um, feedback on some of the proposals as well as I think we're just gonna go through we got the some comments from the TOC for the supply chain reference architecture SSF reference architecture paper. So gonna just go through, make sure there's nothing that's contentious, and then we'll ship it.
Housekeeping item. Would it be possible? I don't know if you own it or not, but can we update the calendar invite to have the right notes document link in it?
Oh, is it? Okay.
I don't think the one that's in there is. It takes me to an empty doc from March 10th.
Oh, okay. Let me write it down. 8 random invite to have right document. So yeah, that's something that currently it's owned by um, the CNCF. What I'm planning to do is to create a calendar just for tag security, just because we have so many meetings. So yeah, I'll fix that when I do that.
Cool. I mean, I got the link. It's in the Slack.
Yeah, I understand it's confusing though, especially when you have like 5, 6 different things like that. I'm just gonna copy and paste the link in here just in case.
Well, actually, the one that I'm seeing in Slack is not the right one. Where am I looking?
Let me write that down. Cool. Hey Shripa, hey Michael.
Hey.
Okay, so I think today what I had on the agenda was to kind of go through some of the proposals and the feedback. Some of us, the chats, were talking about that. We had some ideas to kind of for the directions of the proposals. So I was thinking that we can go through the 3 proposals that were submitted, talk a little bit, and see what people think. And then we had Emily kind of go through and provide the feedback on the paper. I think Michael and Brandon have kind of like reworded some of the stuff. I just wanted to go through as a group in case there were anything that we wanted to kind of check off before we ship it. Any other thoughts from folks? Any other things? I know Shripad, you had also like um, the stuff from BU folks that you wanted to chat about, right?
Yeah, I think they are having some these exams and some deadlines. I think this month, so they have been basically less responsive in that aspect. So once I think they are back up, I didn't realize. I can cover that next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
So next week will be
Yeah. Uh,
okay, April 28th. Just say Shripad talks about stuff. You can fill in the stuff.
yeah. I think it's related to the proposal that we have, right? So then that's good timing.
Any other things that people want to talk about for the agenda today? All right. If not, I want to start with the proposals then. So we had 3 proposals, and like, let me know if I miss any. So we have one from Michael on adding, kind of applying some of the practices for software supply chain onto some of the CNCF projects. We have the one from Shripad. I'm gonna let you talk a little bit more about that later, and then we have the one from Pav talking about SBOMs. So maybe I'll start with the let me share my screen. This is not the right window. Okay, there we go. Can we see this?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So so I think the thought maybe let's just do a refresher. So for each of them, I think we have everyone that opened it here. We give like a quick 1 minute kind of refresher, and then we will talk a little bit about some of the things we discussed in the shares group. So I think this
Sure.
one first is Michael's here.
Yeah. I can go through this. So yeah, it's mostly just sort of saying, hey, can we sort of apply some of the stuff that we've been doing to an actual sort of CNCF project so that we can then use that perhaps as a canonical example. And then one of the other things that's sort of referenced in there is sort of as either as a first step, or if that turns out to be maybe a little difficult because, hey, maybe the tools just aren't there yet or whatever, is to maybe generate a CNCF repo, like like a CNCF repo that is an examples repo of like, hey, here's a hello world program, and here's how you would secure it, and here's how you would generate, the SBOMs for it and generate salsa attestations, and here's how you would sort of enforce 2-person code review and whatever else we have in between those things. And here is it going through something that we think is close enough to a secure software factory or whatever, like a GitHub actions, or if there's a lot of conversations around from like the GitLab, GitHub, as well as some other open source tools around, hey, we might be looking to implement a secure software factory holistically, and then hey, we can have it run through there. So that was kind of the high level thing. And then my only sort of other real thoughts around it were just like, obviously whatever we're doing as the first example, if we can, it should be a real project. But with that said, it probably shouldn't be something absolutely enormous like a Kubernetes or whatever, because that's probably going to take a ton of, there's a ton of legacy stuff that has to be sorted out. It probably makes it much easier if it's a bit of a newer project or a project that's spinning up compared to something that's been around for years. So that's kind of the quick elevator pitch.
So one question, Michael. So do you see any synergy with this new OpenSSF working group securing software repository, right? They are trying to do the similar things for not CNCF project, but in general, right? So
Yep.
is there a synergy or something with them?
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. So I didn't get to attend their first thing there, but yeah, it's definitely probably worthwhile to sort of collaborate with them. There was also already discussion with, for example, with stuff like Scorecard, with stuff like the Security Insights Group, and so on. Yeah, it probably makes sense to sort of collaborate on that.
Yeah, and one other thing, just to add, that one we realized recently, we are evaluating some open source project. So we took Prometheus, Argo CD, and some few. So Prometheus today, it has 21 critical vulnerability in the project, which is master in their main branch, right? So I don't know how this is going through. So maybe I think this particular things, I think we can address, take one of those projects that has these issues, right? Real issues today. It was 21 critical, and some of them are like 2016 vulnerabilities. So I think that is something we can address here also.
Yeah, and I think that will be a part of the scoping, is to figure out, you know, what are projects we want to target, and you know, what's the story that we want to tell here. I think I do want to caution that for this group, I feel like we should be looking towards things that have been already developed and kind of try and do the low hanging fruit. You know, we are not a core engineering, although most of the people here are engineers. We are not kind of like a core engineering development team, right? So I think a lot of the tooling that happens would be outside of it, and if we can reduce the risk of us getting stuck, I think that will be beneficial, especially because, as we've seen, when you have an open source initiative like this, if it stretches more than 3 months, everyone's gonna go missing. So
Yeah.
I think that's important to note.
Yeah, yeah. The way I was sort of envisioning it is, you know, there'd probably be a project that already has a build process. We would just sort of provide, you know, probably open up GitHub issues around stuff like, hey, can you change the build process to do this, this, and this? Or like, you know, just generally sort of add a couple of extra things on there. And I think generally what we'd be asking for are relatively small sorts of things, or stuff like, hey, can you enable the such and such bot on your repo because that seems to hit this requirement or whatever. I think it's going to be definitely around those sorts of things. And if there is a need for like, hey, there is a tool gap here for this sort of practice, maybe we highlight that for ourselves as, you know, a follow-up to, you know, bring it to either an existing project to maybe add a feature or whatever, or to, you know, another group to start to address.
Cool. So I think this proposal looks good. I think maybe the only thing that needs to be fleshed out a little bit is we can talk a little bit about kind of like the scope and timeline, so that we kind of try and fit it into a narrow window. Yeah, so I want to touch on some of the other proposals, and then I want to kind of go back to this, because I feel like for this project we do have some actionable steps for this.
Yep, sure.
Cool. The second one is application build monitors and testers. Shreepad, do you want to talk through this?
Yeah, sure. So the again, sorry, let me just check. Okay. So the idea here is essentially to have this when our builds are happening with any tool like Docker build or any Kernel or whichever, right? They are essentially black box that we don't know what connections they are making or how they are building the application. So the idea is essentially to monitor these builds as they are happening at the system level. So what connections they're making for mapping it to the to the recipe. The Docker file is today's most popular, right? Recipe for building the microservices. And then we can basically say for curl this particular command, it actually tried to, when that particular process actually ran, it actually tried to connect to this particular network and created or deleted these files. And these are the resources it's consumed. And the idea is essentially to bring that insight out, right? So that when these builds are happening, get that insight, and then we can build some policies around it. User can say, I have this, I don't want any connections going out of my internal network, right? 9.x. So they can basically validate them. Also, we can attest, and it can be combined even with the SBOM, right? That once you define your dependencies, and these are essentially some sources or some additional metadata that you can associate with your dependencies, that how they are getting installed and bought into your application builds. And yeah, so the one I think exercise in this is going to be evaluating the existing project like Witness, Jora, which is the cloud project I was mentioning, and then see if there are any gaps and is there something we can do and build around it. Right?
Yeah, so I think generally the feedback I got, I know Andrew Martin, who's like our new chair, is super interested in this topic. I think one of the things that we were trying to get a sense of is, I understand like the technical impact. I think we want to see what the impact is for the group.
Right.
More of like, what, let's say we end up producing a document, right? Who is it going to be for? How is it going to be useful? Like it's a very niche topic, so I feel like it's going to be useful for us, but it isn't necessary. I don't know what the radius is that we're gonna get like impact outside our group.
Right. I think we can even try to align it with some of the salsa stuff, right? Like they need some insight around it. So one thing would be to align and with them, and maybe so some other requirements around some standards. We can even go through them and see if they need this kind of information. We can map it to those requirements.
Yeah.
I
think that may be. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna kind of talk about the OpenSSF being relevant.
Oh, yeah. So I was going to just say, from the OpenSSF perspective, some of the stuff that we've been doing, like for example, with the SSF project, which had its sort of kickoff meeting yesterday, and I know a bunch of folks were on that one as well. One of the key things missing out of there, right, from sort of really implementing a secure software factory is sort of that runtime ability thing, right? So just, to kind of quickly for those who aren't familiar, like the big sort of thing that Secure Software Factory as a reference architecture is doing is it provides sort of the provenance, and how do we sort of help build confidence around that provenance? Well, there's three main sort of categories of things. One is we are sort of securing how we deploy pipelines and builds in the first place, sort of saying, only approved tasks, approved pipelines are allowed to actually be deployed into a system. And then when in that system, when a build actually gets spun up, does it have the appropriate identity associated with it? And how do we know it has the appropriate workload and yada, yada? That's where the SPIFFE Spire stuff comes in. And we have a lot of that sort of stuff. But then how do we actually know, okay, so assuming, that's safe, the actual orchestration of the builds are, relatively safe. How do we know what's actually happening in the build itself is safe? Like if I'm running a Go build, how do I know I'm actually using the correct version of Go? Yes, I can look at a signed thing and yada, yada, but like I still want to have maybe one extra level of, enforcement of, hey, if I notice my Go build tries to go and reach out to malware.com, why is it doing that? I want to kind of catch those sorts of things. So that's kind of like the third category of thing. And I know it's currently been a bit of a gap. So I do think it's still a pretty important thing, and something that probably can also be, collaborated with the OpenSSF stuff as well.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, my gut feel. Sorry, go ahead, Brandon. What's it?
was going to say, go ahead, Brandon, but we're at a stalemate now. I was looking at things like the network and wondering, do we need to at some point get into what the granularity there is? And I don't know if that's something we need to discuss now or much later, but I'm thinking along the lines of there are a lot of hosts that can share the same IP address. There are a lot of things you can host on the same server. If you go out to github.com, did you go to evil repo or good repo within there? And so just having the IP address there might not be enough.
Yeah, so I think the one that I can show you the demo with next time. So we are collecting some additional metadata around it. So right now with eBPF, when we basically snoop the network activity, we get the IP address and some other thing. But if you are, and then we have the files, right? Like how your DNS results are happening and everything. So we can even map to those there. So yeah, I think it's probably, I think it has a lot of things to get figured out here. Yeah. But yeah, you got a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, we're kind of looking at the opposite of some of the stuff I've been looking at. I've been going down the hermetic build path, and you're saying don't make the build hermetic, but just monitor the entire build process. And so it'll be interesting to see how all these play out.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that in this monitoring, if we know the inputs and outputs are valid, does it matter what the middle does? Just wondering.
Yeah, so I mean, if the build servers are compromised, then essentially it's not idempotent, right? Our builds are not idempotent. Given a given input, they probably won't always produce the same output. So if your build servers are compromised or you don't trust the build process itself, then that's essentially what we need to attest, right?
Yeah, and I think to kind of add on there, the idea here is trying to sort of track suspicious sort of behavior. So like, for example, if you kind of look at, the SolarWinds thing, and to be clear, SolarWinds was on a Windows setup, but common sorts of attacks are things like, hey, my compiler went out and sort of injected something into memory and sort of replaced a library I was using or replaced a source file I was using, those sorts of things. And so it's like that sort of anomalous behavior you're trying to detect, where you're like, it's the sort of thing where you say, hey, I'm not aware of the upstream thing being supply chain compromised yet. But because, for example, eBPF and tracing tends to be heavyweight, so I would sort of say this is probably only for your most critical sorts of builds. But you still want to sort of validate, like, if my build should not be reaching out to the internet, if it tries to reach out to the internet, even if it generated something good, I still know something weird is going on in my build.
Yeah, and also I mean, the one use case I tested is once you build in your dev test, right, you expect that to be the case. As you said, this is my expected pattern of build logs, right? Now when you run actually your builds, you can monitor and see, okay, is it compliant? Has there any anomaly with what is expected from the logs, right? So I think those kind of analytics can be built around it, but the first thing is collect the data and attest that one level deep what change is doing there.
So it seems like there's a lot of technical questions that need to be answered here, and a lot of details that are interesting to the group. Kind of want to try and bring it back a little bit to be like, is this something that the group should work on, or is this something that maybe should be part of SSF effort or an open SSF effort?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we are working on this. So if we can get some more help, I think that would be really helpful.
Well, but we also don't want to kind of like, if you spend an additional hour over here trying to push this and then we don't give you what you want.
No, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that like you're best served with the right community, right? So
exactly. Yeah.
So in this case, whether maybe the Salsa working group may be the best community there, because there's a lot of implementers as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
There's a lot of crossover. The thing that made me initially think made more sense over here is just we're talking about container image builds and not general application builds.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's still part of our definition of secure software factory, and something we've sort of even in the doc kind of said, hey, we're not super, we're not talking a ton of details in here just because of there's not a lot of there. There's a lot of POC stuff and there's a lot of like little tools, but not really stuff that has been tied together in sort of a cohesive way of saying, hey, when I run a build, this thing starts tracing what's going on in that build.
So,
But I mean, I know at least from SSF side, we would love to collaborate.
yeah. So I'm gonna conclude this by this is not in our ballpark. So yeah, I feel like we don't have the kind of like development type pipeline, unless you want to be experimental and be the first one. But I don't think you're gonna have a good time. So yeah, I think maybe following up with a sharing this with the Salsa group, the securing repos group, as well as the SSF. I personally think like the SSF group will be a good one to put it in, and then kind of having updates to this group, maybe often, and having updates to the Salsa group. I think that would be like efficient use of your time.
No,
That's
I
how-
agree. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I think this would be good for the SSF. Correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but I think this might be, we're missing this piece, in our current examples and all that kind of stuff. We're not kind of monitoring the actual build itself. So it'd be good to include.
Yeah. So, from the SSF side, we have, stuff to sort of validate to be clear, we just going through every sort of step of the secure software factory, right? It's like we are validating that the pipeline is doing all the right things and that only, pipelines that meet our specification and policy. And then, at least from a, it's not completely, yes. Don't worry. There's still a naming topic on the table of maybe renaming this thing. But SSF is a, the idea there being that, hey, we have that piece sorted out, a specification sort of policy around how builds actually get in. We also have, not 100%, or actually, it's been merged. It hasn't been released yet, right? The Spiffy Spire stuff.
But we have
once
the TP merge, but the actual
Oh, okay. Well, so very soon, but we have some POCs and examples of how to use Spiffy Spire so that we can actually validate that, hey, when a build does get orchestrated, it was at least told to do the right thing. It was, it was spun up with the right parameters. And as long as you're actually trusting your control plane itself, then you can sort of trust what the build is orchestrating. And then, the last piece is like, okay, well, I trust that, but how do I, for like the really, really secure stuff, how do I know that, even, the Go image rate from, I don't know, from Google or whomever, how do I know that image hasn't been compromised in some way, even if it's been signed and whatever? That's kind of where the runtime visibility stuff comes into play.
All right. So it sounds like we have general enough consensus on this. I want to move on to our last proposal and then kind of have a little bit of time to just run through the document. So the last one is from Path, and this one's on SBOMs. All right, Path, go ahead and bring us through.
Yep. Yeah. So my basic proposal, and then of course, Brandon Mitchell and I think Hector added a few more comments in there that were actually very great in terms of expanding out this, the scope, as well as some of the things that I wasn't actually thinking about. So basically, it's currently like I know, for example, like Co was creating an SBOM but then it didn't align properly. Like it was missing some kind of parameters or things that it needed in order for the SBOM to be complete or validated, all that kind of stuff. So there's not a great consensus, or maybe not a great standard that is being utilized by the community that includes all the parameters. So is there anything that's missing? So basically, the proposal initially was, is there anything that's missing from the SBOM? But then Brandon Mitchell brought up some good points, saying like, okay, what about in terms of how is the SBOM being shipped? How is it going to be used? Like, is it being used by vulnerability scanners or whatever else, like further down the line, kind of like how the dependency tracker kind of uses it today? Where in terms of like authenticity, like are we doing any kind of signing or anything else with the SBOM to show that it's valid? Like, does it need to be signed? And then when is it safe to delete? So there's a lot of questions, open questions around the the generation of the SBOM, utilization of the SBOM, and then when can it be deleted and when is it no longer needed, and the authenticity of the SBOM itself. And then the other piece was, like for example, like Tekton would run through, has a lot of different pieces associated with it, right? So does a project like that create multiple SBOMs, and then how are these SBOMs kind of linked together, and how is that going to be done? So I think Hector brought up saying that he down in the comments basically that they were doing something similar. They did have some kind of a project where they could actually tie together the different SBOMs. So that could be worth looking into. And I think Steve, later on, there's a lot of comments associated with it, but that's the general gist of it.
This guy. So a couple comments, at least, or maybe not comments, but there's just a little bit additional context on maybe some of the things that are going on as well. I'll add this to the issue as well, but there is an SBOM coalition group that's happening. So this was kind of like prompted from CISA. So there's a separate group that's kind of discussing some of this. CISA is going to set up a bunch of different working groups to talk about SBOM, like generic SBOM things. So I think that there's a lot of efforts going on with this, and so I think we want to be in order to provide better value, because like a lot of those groups are focusing on very broad, right? They're like government and like trying solving vendor problems and things like that. So I think one thing that we could try and do here is to kind of like focus a little bit more on a cloud native use case, and kind of talk a little bit about that, or just talking a little bit about what are some of the problems. And so I have this document that I've written. Now it's public, so I can share it. So I kind of talk a little bit about all the different problems in SBOM. And part of these is one of the what question. And this was kind of like prompted from Alan from CISA, which is like when you have a cloud provider or something like that, what does it mean to have an SBOM? Or whether SBOM, is the right way to go there. So yeah.
Just a couple of quick things on that front as well is, this is not aimed at anybody, but I think generally a lot of folks have sort of been disappointed in just not the how SBOMs are sort of like the tooling or whatever. It's just like generally like nobody can still sort of come to a consensus on what is an SBOM, what should be included in an SBOM, and what's the purpose there, which leads to a lot of, there's a lot of open questions, right? If an SBOM is like a best effort scan of a thing, lots of things can be SBOMs. If it's something that is like, no, it should be intended to be at some level canonical, assuming whatever you're using to generate the SBOM isn't compromised or doesn't have bugs, right? assuming that, like it becomes very, very unclear there. I mean, I know my 2 cents is always like, I really like everything that the Nix folks have done, and they've included in sort of their equivalent of an SBOM, which is everything from build environment to transitively everything up to what they call the stage 0 builder, right? You know, it's like literally everything from up to a handwritten compiler. But that sort of thing is not, you know, feasible for most projects at this point. So like, what does it mean today? I think one thing I think that's really important though is when I think about consuming SBOMs, I think that one of the biggest things I care about is who generated the SBOM. So in the very least, I can make decisions based on, hey, I trust this this person, or sorry, this, you know, this builder to have generated an SBOM, because I know it tends to be pretty comprehensive, that kind of thing.
So another on that point, right? I think one of the things we discussed in the chair meeting is that we are pretty well positioned as a CNCF group to say that like this should be what SBOM should be for cloud native. So I think that's where we see we have an opportunity to kind of influence things, to kind of have CNCF guidance on what the SBOM should be.
Yep. And just one thing from my perspective, which I think is the stuff that I would love to see Cloud help answer, is help answer the layering problem. Like if I have an SBOM for my container and now I layer a bunch of extra stuff on that, what is my new SBOM?
Yep.
How does that, you know, and then especially if some of those things are like, hey, this layer actually removed something out of it. So do we still want a record of it existing previously? I mean, we could, yeah, those are some of the questions I think that I would love to see Cloud Native answer.
Oh, that's just opening a big old can of worms right there.
Of course, I had to open up with it, like the you know, it's not the simple question, you know, it's the simple stuff is the easy stuff.
Yeah. So I think I agree with everything that's kind of like brought up in this issue and what we've been talking about, right? I think the thing is like, in order for us to make it stick, or for this, whatever comes out of this effort to be able for us to force it onto other people, in a sense, is that we need to make it within our domain, which is cloud native. If the CNCF puts out a general guidance on SBOM document, it's not going to stick because 10 other people are going to create guidance for SBOM documents, right? So I think for us, it would be valuable for us to kind of scope it to cloud native. And I think we have to figure out what exactly that means as well, right?
No, I agree. Definitely, I think the scope should be, you know, cloud native. And if we have the influence, or if this group has the influence to have the community get behind, you know, whatever, some kind of a standard SBOM or something, kind of a format, that'd be great.
Given that a lot of this is still being developed right now, how much are we going to say this is a following guidance of this is what the industry provides and this is our recommendation of how to use whatever is available? And how much do we want to start pulling in some of those industry developers, pull in the SBOM generators, pull in the software scanners into this discussion and say, let's make sure we're designing something that you can eventually build?
My 2 cents on it is I almost even think we might even need to go one stage before that, of just, hey, what is the wish list coming out of us from a cloud native perspective on those things? And then we go into the individual tools and see, you know, some of that. Because I think I don't want us to limit ourselves just based on what's currently there. Just because I think, you know, we're coming in from, hey, we're the cloud native supposedly. And I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that we're probably going to dig up that are just things that maybe nobody does, and maybe based on the way SBOMs currently work or are currently defined, is not something that is a requirement, and either it should be a requirement or we should rethink how these things work. And I like one thing I think that Steve did bring up, which I do think is important in his comment at the bottom, is in his article, is he does kind of sort of say, hey, like the way that SBOMs are defined today, it says software. Does that really only mean software? Does it mean, all these other things? And then, what does that mean? And I think we should kind of figure that out.
Yeah. So, man, we're even starting our sentences the same way.
I know.
So given that, do we want to split this into 2 phases, wish list phase, and then the actual go out to the vendor phase?
I think let's scope it to, I think the wish list phase, or I don't know whether we don't call it. I feel like wishes may not be the most accurate thing. Maybe like best practices. I think we can afford to be a little bit more assertive. But that's just naming. So yeah, I agree, splitting up into 2 phases. I think concentrating on the first one, especially now that like the EO deadline is coming up, this document would be very impactful. So I agree with you, Brendan, on that.
Yeah. I also agree with you, Brendan, on the saying, I think we can be very assertive. To sort of reiterate, we can be very clear. I don't know if folks have seen so far a lot of the feedback on SBOM stuff, the stuff that's coming out of the government, but outside of a handful of folks, like, there's some folks at Google, there's some folks at the various foundation projects, a lot of the feedback is has not been thinking with the actual sort of technical requirements in mind. It's tends to be kind of nitpicky, or a lot of like, I don't think I should have to do this kind of comments. Or, folks who obviously they want to sell SBOM, so they want to be able to say what an SBOM is. Whereas here, I think we're trying to say, hey, we're coming from the CNCF perspective, and these are the things that we think are really important. And some of those things might be hard, which is why a lot of people are, who maybe are making tools, are not bringing that up as a thing that they think should be in there.
So did you want me to update this proposal for phase 1 and phase 2, or how do we want to go about it?
Yeah, I think to update the proposal, or if you want to just like create 2 ones and then close this one.
Okay.
That both would work. Awesome. So one thing about this proposal, so I kind of gonna float to the group, right? I think this is SBOM is kind of like a separate topic. Well, separate enough from supply chain. And of course, I think this will come down to like who's keen on working on stuff, and we probably will pull up. But I think if we want to do this work, and I think we're gonna get a lot of people that also want to chime in on this. Do we want to run a parallel SBOM working group?
I think keeping it for in the same, and then if going forward, if we see the need, we can split, right? But for now,
I think the question is more of like, for folks on this call, do you have the bandwidth to do 2 working groups?
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah, I
or
agree with
yeah.
I agree with Shripad. I think keep it in this working group, and if it's too much, then we can break it out in the future. But
Yeah, I also found that sometimes, like, if there's 5 or 6, if there's like a handful of folks who just kind of want to hop on a call, that's a bit easier than necessarily having a whole new working group.
Okay.
So Brandon,
Third or fourth.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say to third or fourth, all the other suggestions there. It's you jump on these meetings, and sometimes you might have a slow week for one project, and the other one's got a lot of stuff to talk about. So splitting your time might not be that difficult.
So you were saying, are there any logistical issues with CNCF?
Well, not. I mean, I can just send an email and it's fixed, right? I just wanted to get a vibe on like what people are feeling like. Do they feel like this is like a separate topic that maybe they're not interested in because they really want to do just supply chain stuff, or like from what I'm seeing now, it seems like most people seem to be interested in SBOMs enough. So like they wouldn't be offended if we talked about SBOMs regularly on this call. Yeah. Cool. So I think the last question it comes down to is we have 2 proposals that are good for this group. Do we want to work on both of them in parallel? And I think this is more a question of now after the proposals have been shaped up, we are going to try and get people to say whether they're interested in it. And my general thought is that we'll see who's interested in it. If there is enough of a distinct set of people that are interested in both topics, we can do both at the same time. But if there's like 5 people interested in each of the 2 proposals, and it's 5 of the same people, then we kind of have to pick one. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Cool. So I think for now, let's shape out the proposals. I think for the first one, Michael, I think I want to chat with you a little bit about that. See what we can. I have some ideas to scope that. And Path, Path, if we can kind of create a new proposal, I think that would be awesome.
we'll do.
Cool. So I think the next step for us is to now touch out the proposals. We're going to share it in the main group. We're going to share it in the mailing list. We're going to get feedback, and then we'll go from there.
So thinking real quick on Parse proposal, it's already got the most of it there. And I think we were just going to scope it down to saying this one's the wish list and thinking about a second one for the parallel. But the second one on that one, the actual whatever change we want to make, that would follow this. So do we just want to modify this proposal and just say this is a wish list for right now?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I agree. Let's modify this to be a wish list.
Just trying to simplify your work, Parth.
Appreciate
Yeah,
that.
and I guess just have a section at the bottom to be like not included in scope but in future work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Cool. Let's see, we only have 10 minutes left. Let's go through the RFC document and where's the RFC document? Don't link it to me. Wait, is it this one?
Oh, yes. Oh, so I think I changed that. Yeah, I already changed that.
Okay,
So
yeah,
we can clear that one out.
I'm assuming this is okay since I'm
Yeah. So Emily had in the context of her other comments, she was trying to say, "Oh yeah, generate verifiable provenance is the goal here. We're not,
Yeah.
we can't verify that the evidence in that are just sort of tested there are."
Site. I can do this right now. Um, so artifacts are published, maybe with explicitly stating artifacts are signed twice and why. Oh no. Okay. Wait, what's
That
the
is
context of
a good
this?
point there. Um,
This-
so my 2 cents is I actually don't necessarily if I have an attestation that something built a thing and that attestation is signed, I don't necessarily also need the thing to be signed by, let's say, the same identity
Yeah.
per se. That's just me, but I'm like I haven't given it so much thought to know whether or not there's other reasons outside of potentially some practicality of like, oh yeah, it's I don't want to take a look at the attestation right now. I just can see that it's signed.
Yeah. So do you want to say something like having the additional signature on both on an artifact and its metadata may be used by may be consumed by policy in a different way.
I'm almost wondering if that sentence was just an artifact of design by committee here, because it's describing how you do the signing, and the first one is saying you should do the signing. Like the method of signing an artifact is to take the hash and then sign the hash.
Yeah, so do we say just say artifacts here and not say sign artifacts?
That
Although
might be
I-
a lot clearer.
Yeah. I agree, yeah.
Because hashing and signing it without the metadata would be signing the artifact, right?
Yeah. Take signed out, I agree.
Okay. Well, in this paragraph, they have as these artifacts are produced, they should be signed. So you just remove the sign as well.
What if we're saying if artifacts are published to an artifact store, and the first one is if they aren't published to an artifact store?
Then we just say this is
Although-
may, so artifacts may be published.
Still, I think
They
those
sh-
two paragraphs are saying the same thing. They're just, we're repeating ourselves a little bit here.
Formats. Let me try something. So this one.
say, yeah. Yep, I agree.
Any objections?
No, I think that this sounds good.
Do we not? Do we have to? We have to add a reference to this hermeticity.
Just a small nit while you were there. There was an extra line feeding section, stage 7,
Oh, this one.
between the bullets and the
Oh,
paragraph.
this one. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Is this the first time we? Why did this? All these artifacts come up? Do we have a glossary for this? No, I think we should just add into the glossary. We need to explain reproducible as well, right?
I think we had that definitions in the beginning, right? We had
In the
defined.
beginning.
Yeah.
It's still good if we're going to do a glossary. We should probably start pulling a bunch of these key terms.
Yeah. Yeah.
Reproducible, hermetic, even what an artifact is.
Yeah, we don't really. Over artifacts. Blah, blah, blah. We describe all the objects. We don't describe the properties of like hermeticity and reproducible.
So we do.
So-
So we do have them in the best practices guide. I wonder if we can.
Okay.
Do we want to? Do we talk about them enough to just to say, because I feel like if we bring it up like 4 or 5 times, then probably we should also define it in the paper. But if it's only like once or twice, maybe we could just cite the best practices guide.
Agree. Let's add a footnote here and here to just like reference that. Sound good? Okay. Sorry, best practices white paper. Does anyone remember this thing? Can we point to a particular section here? This should be good. I thought I fixed all these. Why is it back to? Oh my god! I thought I fixed everything.
I don't know what's up with Google Docs, but it often does that to me too, where it'll reset my my locale, and yeah. Anyway,
You translate this document to English. Oh god. Okay, so it looks like couple other things. Okay, yeah, I think let's figure this out offline. We should aim to get all these like ironed out by end of day tomorrow, so that we have time to actually produce a document. Cool. We're at time, so I guess we'll chat next week.
Bye bye.
All right.